I caught my husband in the act of cheating, an experience I never thought I'd have. Most people would likely confront their spouse upon discovering evidence of infidelity, but I stumbled upon the truth firsthand in a setting I never anticipated, surrounded by unsuspecting witnesses. Suspicions about their relationship had lingered in my mind, but nothing prepared me for witnessing my husband's betrayal so publicly. My name is Christina, a stay-at-home mom to a 6-year-old son. On the day of the incident, my husband had a rare day off, and we had plans for a family outing. However, when I awoke, he was already gone. A message informed me he was tending to his feverish sister, and with no one else home, he expected to return in the evening. As the message came through, a heavy sigh escaped my lips. I had promised my son a day of fun at the amusement park, and he had eagerly anticipated it since the day before. I knew my husband had been shouldering a significant workload lately, immersed in a major project for the past 6 months without respite. This day was meant to be a rare opportunity for our family to bond. Instead, he chose to attend to his sister's needs. She supposedly had a fiancé, rendering her capable of managing on her own. Yet my husband's penchant for playing caretaker to his sister prevailed. It wasn't the first time his sister's needs took precedence over our family plans. His fixation on his sister had always unsettled me. He once admitted that he was drawn to me because of my resemblance to her, coupled with my supposedly exceptional qualities. While I acknowledged his sister's beauty and kindness when I met her long ago, being likened to her always left me feeling uneasy. It seemed the highest compliment he could offer, but the underlying implications left me feeling uncomfortable. My husband used to express his desire for both a son and a daughter, often initiating intimacy. However, since the birth of our son, there's been a noticeable decline in our physical connection, to the point where it's non-existent now. Considering our youth and my husband's prior enjoyment of intimacy, suspicions arise that he may be seeking it elsewhere. Betrayal is one thing I could perhaps forgive, albeit reluctantly, but what troubles me more is his consistent absence, even on days off like today. Spending time with our child should be a natural inclination, yet he seems indifferent. Our son, deeply attached to his father, becomes distraught when he's absent. Despite ample opportunities, my husband fails to engage with our son, neglecting simple gestures like birthday gifts or attending school functions. Instead, he retreats to his room, engrossed in endless gaming sessions, disconnected from family life. If this continues, our once close father-son bond risks fading into unfamiliarity. I grew increasingly skeptical of my husband's claims about being engrossed in a major project, considering his prolonged absences from home. Seeking clarification, I reached out to a former classmate employed at the same company. Is my husband truly buried in work as he claims? I inquired, a hint of suspicion in my tone. My classmate chuckled before responding, absolutely not. If anything, your husband has earned a reputation as a window-side employee. He appears disinterested and clocks out on time every day. Confirmation of my suspicions sent a wave of realization crashing over me. It aligned perfectly with my observations. Despite purportedly leading a significant project, his modest salary and lack of exhaustion contradicted his narrative. Such inconsistencies only fueled my doubts about his fidelity. Frustration weighed heavily on me as I finished preparing breakfast. Glancing at the time, I furrowed my brow in concern. It was unusual for my son not to be up by 7 a.m., especially since he typically woke early. Now, it was already past that hour, and if we didn't hurry, he'd miss the nursery school bus. Hastily, I made my way to his room to rouse him. Entering his room, I found him still fast asleep. "It's morning, sweetheart, time to wake up," I called out, expecting a swift response. Instead, all I heard was a strained groan. Alarmed, I reached out to touch his forehead and was met with intense heat. Anxiety surged through me as I gently shook his shoulder, urging him to wake. "Mama, I can't breathe," he murmured weakly, his words sending a chill down my spine. Panic threatened to consume me as thoughts raced through my mind. With news of an outbreak at the nursery school circulating, dread seized me. Could my son be afflicted too? Reports of children succumbing to the illness only heightened my fear, and I dreaded the possibility of losing him. In a frantic bid for help, I reached for my phone, dialing my husband's number repeatedly. Yet each attempt went unanswered, leaving me to grapple with fear and uncertainty alone. Without a moment to spare, I bypassed waiting for an email response and reached out to my mother for urgent first aid guidance. With her nursing expertise, she was my go-to expert in moments like these. Swiftly following her precise instructions, I fashioned an ice pack and took my son's temperature, finding it alarmingly high at over 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Without hesitation, I dialed for an ambulance and tended to my son, ensuring he stayed hydrated while awaiting medical assistance. Concerned about the potential for heat stroke, as my mother had cautioned, I acted swiftly to mitigate any further risks. As the ambulance arrived, I faced the sobering reality that I couldn't accompany my son due to infection precautions. Left with no alternative, I hailed a taxi and hurried to the hospital where he would be treated. Throughout the ordeal, I persisted in attempting to reach my husband, despite knowing the futility of my efforts. Dishearteningly, my attempts went unanswered, prompting me to leave a desperate message online, clinging to the hope that he might see it and respond if he possessed a shred of responsibility. Upon reaching the hospital, I anxiously awaited outside the emergency treatment room, fervently praying for my son's swift recovery. Memories of losing my father in a similar emergency room flooded my mind, igniting fears of losing my son as well. As I grappled with the possibility of another devastating loss, my mother, a steadfast source of support, offered reassurance, her words a comforting refrain amidst the turmoil. An hour later, relief washed over me as I received news of my son's rescue. However, medical advice dictated a week-long hospital stay for his recovery, prompting his transfer to a hospital room. Despite the harrowing ordeal, my husband remained absent, compounding my sense of isolation. Determined to provide for my son's needs, I returned home the following day to gather essentials and decided to bring him some fruit as a gesture of care. Wanting to express gratitude to the doctor who had aided us, I made a detour past the emergency room, only to find chaos unfolding within its confines. Sensing I might be in the way, I postponed my visit to the doctor, turning to head towards my son's room. It was then that I witnessed a startling sight. A man and a woman on a stretcher, their bodies entwined as if caught in a bizarre embrace. The scene hinted at a precarious situation, one where they appeared to be joined together, perhaps a consequence of a mishap during intimate moments. I navigated the chaotic scene, my mind filled with sympathy for those caught in such a vulnerable predicament. The embarrassment of being transported in such a manner must be excruciating, I mused, attempting to pass by discreetly. However, my thoughts were abruptly interrupted as my gaze locked with that of a familiar face. Under ordinary circumstances, the encounter might have been merely awkward. Yet for me, it was nothing short of shocking. My husband lay on the stretcher, his expression betraying surprise at our unexpected reunion. "What are you doing here?" I blurted out, astonishment coloring my voice. Caught off guard, my husband stammered, well, I've caught my sister's cold," his words faltering in the face of my inquiry. Confusion clouded my mind as I grappled with the surreal coincidence of encountering my husband in the same emergency room where our son had been admitted just the day before. Questions swirled in my head as I watched him being transported, unclothed, alongside another woman. Who was she, and why were they together? Amidst my bewilderment, my gaze met the eyes of the woman accompanying my husband. Despite the chaos, a flicker of recognition sparked within me. Even in my state of disarray, I couldn't deny the truth staring back at me. This woman was my husband's mistress. As I glared at her, a familiar voice cut through the tumult, pulling me from my thoughts. "Why on earth is Christina here?" the voice exclaimed. Recognition dawned upon me. Of course, the woman beside my husband was none other than Brenna, his sister. Time seemed to stretch out endlessly as I processed the surreal unfolding of events. Suspicions of my husband's deceit had simmered within me, but I never anticipated this revelation. Even if he had come to check on our son, his entanglement with another woman, especially his own sister, was beyond comprehension. Despite the urge to confront them immediately, the sight of my husband and his sister being wheeled away on a stretcher forced me to restrain myself. I knew they couldn't evade scrutiny, so I resolved to address the situation later. Suppressing the surge of emotions, I redirected my focus to my son, the initial reason for my visit. With a heavy weight settling in my chest, I sought solace in his room, attempting to untangle the jumble of feelings swirling within me. When I checked my phone, it was flooded with messages from my husband, each one attempting to gloss over the situation. Notably absent was any mention of our son's hospitalization. Deciding to continue ignoring him, I waited patiently for another hour. Soon enough, the doctor who had tended to my son the previous day appeared. Their smile was reassuring as they delivered the news. Your son is doing remarkably well. His recovery is progressing faster than anticipated. His fever has subsided and his condition has stabilized. Initially, we were concerned about the possibility of infection, but it seems he was suffering from heat stroke in addition to a cold. The doctor's praise for my actions brought a sense of validation, even though I knew much of it was owed to my mother's guidance. I made a mental note to express my gratitude to her, perhaps with a thoughtful gift of fancy meat next time. I offer a deep bow of gratitude to the compassionate doctor before me, though beneath my relief for my son's improving health, a storm of anger brewed within me. It was clear that I was about to confront a significant ordeal. As I struggled to contain my emotions, my son's innocent remark about my stern expression snapped me back to composure. I quickly donned a smile for his sake. Mama's face is just pretending to be scary. I'm not scared, I reassured him before stepping away with a promise to return soon. Exiting the hospital, I braced myself for the impending conversation with my husband, who had bombarded me with over 100 missed calls. The moment he answered, a torrent of excuses spilled forth. It wasn't what it looked like. There's an explanation, he'd insisted, attempting to justify his actions. His misplaced priorities only fueled my frustration. Shouldn't his foremost concern be our son's well-being? There's no way a man so absorbed in such a despicable act with his own sister, neglecting our son's well-being, could ever truly care. I muttered to myself, the bitterness evident in my voice. With a husband like him, I feared for our son's future. Recognizing the bleak reality of my husband's character, I made the difficult decision to divorce him. Despite the challenges ahead, I was determined to navigate them for the sake of my son. Turning to face him, I unleashed the pent-up anger that had been simmering within me. So, while our son was suffering, you were preoccupied with that, weren't you? Indulging whenever you had a moment to spare, and with your own sister, no less. It's utterly repulsive, I spat out at him. He stood speechless, unable to offer a defense. Pressing on, I delivered my final blow. Oh, and just so you know, I've already informed your parents. I won't involve your company, for now. It would be a shame if you couldn't meet your obligations for alimony and child support. Goodbye, I concluded, severing ties with my husband with those parting words. 3 days later, my son made a full recovery, surpassing all expectations. With the discharge process complete, I returned home, embracing my beloved son's restored health. Naturally, my husband was nowhere to be found. In the aftermath of the ordeal, my husband sought me out to offer his apologies in person. Yet, as he pleaded for forgiveness, I sullenly handed him the divorce papers I had already prepared and signed. This wasn't an isolated incident, I responded, my voice devoid of warmth. I know the truth now. Your sister confessed everything. I anticipated my husband's reluctance to accept the reality of our situation, knowing that our path to divorce wouldn't be easily agreed upon. To confront him and ensure his silence, I decided to approach his sister, who was complicit in the affair. Congratulations on your upcoming wedding ceremony with your boyfriend, I began, masking my disdain with forced politeness. Thank you. I was actually thinking of crafting a clever story to share the news. Would you like to hear it? She replied, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Are you planning to disclose everything to everyone? I interjected, my tone sharpening. I want the truth to come out. It's time people see you for who you truly are, I retorted with a smirk, relishing the power of my revelation. Please, don't do this. It would destroy my life, she pleaded, a hint of desperation in her voice. Feigning contemplation, I maintained a composed smile as I proposed, I suppose I could keep this under wraps on one condition. How about you disclose every detail of your encounters with my husband? Then perhaps I'll consider staying silent, though rest assured, your brother will still feel the sting of betrayal. What say you? Without a moment's hesitation, my sister-in-law acquiesced, her desperation palpable. Please spare him the pain. I'll tell you everything, she confessed readily. Confronting my husband with the truth left him reeling, his beloved sister's betrayal cutting him to the core. Overwhelmed, he collapsed from the shock, only to awaken and promptly sign the divorce papers, burdened by the weight of his betrayal. Taking decisive action, I enlisted the aid of a lawyer to secure divorce, custody of our son, and the appropriate financial support. Though my husband initially balked at the demands, a whispered reminder of his potential exposure prompted his compliance. With a heavy heart, he departed the lawyer's office, resigned to the consequences of his actions. Following the revelation of the affair, word somehow reached my husband's workplace, leading to a stern rebuke from his superiors. A month later, he faced the harsh consequence of dismissal, forced to seek employment at a food factory. Now, tasked with adorning cakes with strawberries to fulfill his obligations for alimony and child support, he found himself ostracized among his co-workers, his past indiscretions a constant source of discomfort, fueled by incessant rumors, particularly among younger female colleagues. As for my husband's sister, despite my discretion in withholding the truth, the details of her involvement inevitably surfaced. Her engagement swiftly crumbled under the weight of suspicion when her boyfriend, echoing my own doubts, enlisted the services of a private investigator to uncover the truth. Following the shattered engagement, she found herself facing a hefty compensation demand, forcing her to seek employment at a nightclub to make ends meet. Recently, her ex-boyfriend, perhaps feeling a pang of remorse, handed her a compromising photo of their affair with a casual, "keep it for when you might need it." She couldn't help but marvel at his audacity as she stowed it away in her drawer, a potential leverage should her husband attempt any further indiscretions. In pursuit of a fresh start, she relocated to her parents' home, where she's rebuilding her life with their unwavering support, especially in raising her son. Despite their geographical distance, her parents eagerly offer assistance whenever needed, although she strives not to burden them excessively, reserving their help for times of genuine necessity. Since recovering from that severe fever, my son has enjoyed pristine health, almost as if the ordeal never occurred. Remarkably, he's received awards for perfect attendance 3 years running, seemingly oblivious to the absence of his biological father. Witnessing his contentment each day brings me unparalleled joy. On another note, our family has expanded with the addition of Angel, a charming white cat. Originally a frequent visitor to our yard, Angel quickly endeared himself to me. Reluctant to bid him farewell upon moving, I brought him along to my parents' home. Now, he's formed a close bond with them, becoming an integral part of our family alongside my son. As I sit on the porch, gently stroking Angel's fur, I find solace in the warmth of family and companionship. Watching my son thrive in the loving embrace of my parents, with Angel by our side, fills me with a profound sense of contentment and gratitude for the life we've built together. My name is Laura. 6 months ago, I married my high school sweetheart, Matt. We've known each other since childhood, so I've always been close to his family, which made the wedding process incredibly smooth. We share many mutual friends, turning our wedding into a joyous celebration filled with well-wishers. I promised to stand by Matt for the rest of our lives. A few months after we got married, I discovered I was pregnant. I was over the moon, and the blessings kept coming. Matt's mom was incredibly supportive, helping us out almost every day. Since we got married, we've been living with Matt's parents. As an only child, Matt was raised with a lot of love and care, so living with his parents after our wedding felt like the natural choice. I had no qualms about it and agreed immediately. From the day after our wedding, I enjoyed doing household chores with my mother-in-law, and we would chat about all sorts of things. When I announced my pregnancy, she cried tears of joy, celebrating as if it were her own good news. Whenever I tried to do anything around the house, she'd say, "Don't worry, Laura, I've got this," and take over. I'd reassure her, "I'm feeling fine today, really," but she'd insist, "You have to think of the baby first. Rest up," and stop me from doing anything. While I appreciated her concern, it reached a point where I was bored out of my mind. I had been working part-time, but I quit my job as soon as I found out I was pregnant, on the advice of both my mother-in-law and Matt. With nothing to do at home, I was going stir-crazy. I feel like moving around a bit. Can I go shopping? Need anything?" I'd ask, hoping for some freedom. But she'd firmly respond, "Absolutely not. You're not even in your second trimester yet. You need to rest," and wouldn't let me leave the house. I understood her concern, but it felt suffocating. She had a miscarriage before having Matt because she continued working, so she was worried I'd face the same fate. "If you're not careful, you'll end up in the hospital like I did," she'd warned me. Not wanting to create tension, I decided to take it easy until my second trimester. Once I reached that milestone, she started allowing me short walks. Matt and I would go out on his days off, buying snacks from a local store and having little picnics. Sometimes I'd go for a walk with my mother-in-law while shopping. She even started cooking with me again. I realized she was just deeply concerned for me during the early stages of my pregnancy. At 38 weeks, my water broke while I was climbing the stairs at home. With Matt and my father-in-law at work, my mother-in-law quickly drove me to the hospital. Matt had already coordinated everything with the hospital, so by the time our baby Brian was born, he was right there with us. Matt was the first to hold Brian. "Oh, he's so adorable," he said, his eyes welling up with tears as he lovingly gazed at our newborn. Seeing him so emotional made me tear up too. "Thank you, Laura. I'm so happy right now," Matt said, smiling at me, and I couldn't help but cry. "May I come in?" My mother-in-law, who had kindly stepped out of the room, peeked her head in. "Go ahead and hold him, Mom. He's really cute," Matt said, handing Brian over to her. I felt a bit awkward. My mother-in-law had been incredibly supportive and was eagerly awaiting her grandchild. What would she say now that Brian was here? The thought made me anxious. "Thanks to you, we were able to have Brian safely. Thank you so much," I said to her, grateful for all her support. But her response was unexpected. "He doesn't look like him." "What?" I asked, unsure if I heard her correctly. "What do you mean? He doesn't look like Matt. Are you sure he's Matt's child?" What was she talking about? This should have been a happy moment, but my heart started racing uncontrollably. "What are you saying?" Matt immediately confronted her, but she continued without apologizing. "Look at Matt's baby pictures. Brian doesn't resemble him at all," she said, showing us a baby picture of Matt on her phone. "Well, they don't have to look exactly alike," I started to say, but before I could finish, she stormed out of the room, exclaiming, "I can't deal with a child whose parentage is in question." "Hey, Mom," Matt said, following her out and leaving me alone. I looked at Brian's face and started to cry. He looked so much like Matt, especially around the eyes and ears. Matt never returned to the room and only texted me to say he was going home with his mom. I was stunned by his behavior but too exhausted to confront him. A few days later, on the day of my discharge, Matt came to pick me up but seemed distant. "What's wrong? We get to live together starting today," I said, trying to lift the mood, but he didn't seem happy. "Mom's still upset. Try not to provoke her," he said. I had just given birth and was mentally and physically drained. Why did I have to be considerate of her on the day I was discharged? I didn't say anything and the ride home was silent. The tension didn't ease even after we got home. As soon as I walked in, my mother-in-law greeted me with sarcasm, saying, "Oh, you're back." My father-in-law avoided eye contact and my mother-in-law continued with snide remarks. "I've told you many times, this child is Matt's. His name is Brian. Won't you please love him?" I pleaded, but she ignored me completely. "Say something, Matt," I cried out, but he responded coldly, "It's true. He doesn't look like me." At that moment, my tears dried up. Matt, who should have supported me, had abandoned me. Looking back, I wished Matt had stood up to his mother, but instead, he sided with her. I felt hollow and resigned myself to the idea that my mother-in-law might never love Brian. Matt wasn't helping with childcare either, which only added to my stress. "Can you feed him formula while I take a shower?" I asked. Matt replied, "I've been working all day. Why should I lose sleep over a child who might not even be mine?" I couldn't believe this was happening. "Never mind," I said, feeding Brian the formula myself and quickly taking a shower once he fell asleep. This had become my life. If it had only been my mother-in-law, I might have considered getting a DNA test to prove her wrong. But even Matt wasn't convinced Brian was his. That hurt more than anything. My parents had moved to the countryside soon after I got married, so I couldn't rely on them for support. They had been thrilled about my marriage and had welcomed Matt as if he were their own child, which made it impossible for me to confide in them. After months of this, my mother-in-law, who had been avoiding me, finally spoke up. "Laura, can you bring the baby to the living room?" "All right," I replied. My mother-in-law had been ignoring both me and Brian, and I thought she might finally apologize. But my expectations were quickly dashed when I arrived in the living room and found both her and Matt sitting there. "Could you please leave with that child?" she demanded. "What?" I was stunned and at a loss for words. She glanced at Brian and continued, "He still doesn't look like him. I've had enough." Matt remained silent. At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. "Fine, if that's how you feel, I'll pack my things and leave," I said, grabbing the divorce papers and starting to pack. Matt said nothing and continued his conversation with his mother. "Make sure you pay child support," she said. "How can we when we're not even sure he's Matt's?" my mother-in-law shot back. I was seething with anger. Without saying another word, I left and went to my parents' house. I explained everything to them, and though they were initially confused, they welcomed me with open arms. I decided to stay with them while I looked for a job and saved some money. I had requested child support from my ex-husband through a lawyer, but the payments never came through. I was determined to cut ties with my ex and his family, so I chose not to press the issue of the unpaid support. Years passed, and Brian was about 6 years old when I received a call from a local friend who also knew Matt, informing me that Matt had died in a car accident. Although I heard about it soon after it happened, I chose not to get involved. Brian was in a busy, active phase, and we didn't attend the funeral. A month later, while catching up with local friends and returning to my hometown for the first time in years, I decided to buy a gift before heading to my friend's house. So Ryan and I went to a department store we used to visit as a family. Laura, I turned around to see my mother-in-law, whom I hadn't seen in years. I stood there, stunned, as she quickly approached us and said, "You're Brian, right?" and began talking to him. "Brian, I'm your grandma. You really look just like Matt," she said. I couldn't tolerate hearing that. "Enough is enough. Because of you." "Wait," I started, but she cut me off. "Don't be so angry. I've wanted to see you for so long." Feeling my frustration rising, I said, "Excuse us," and pulled Brian away, leaving the scene. "Was that Grandma, Bri?" Brian asked. I had kept his grandmother's identity a secret until now, but Brian, now in elementary school, was genuinely curious and kept asking, "Isn't Grandma supposed to be your mom? Who was that lady?" I couldn't avoid it any longer, so I explained it to him in simple terms. When we got home, Brian looked up at me and said, "Mama, you've been through a lot, huh?" As he patted my head. His kindness made tears well up in my eyes. I felt deeply grateful for having him in my life. A month later, my mother-in-law showed up at the apartment where Brian and I were living. "How did you find us?" I asked, surprised. She replied, "I asked around through Matt and our mutual friends. I finally tracked you down," and pushed her way inside. "Please leave," I said firmly. She responded, "Matt died in an accident, and my husband passed away from illness. You two are all the family I have left." Brian came out of the next room, likely drawn by my mother-in-law's loud voice. Spotting him, she said, "Brian, why don't you come live with Grandma? I have a bigger house and can give you lots of delicious food." "Stop it," I said as my mother-in-law pulled out a thick envelope. "It contains $50,000 for child support. You two are all the family I have left, so please come live with me," she said, pushing the envelope toward me. Then she turned to Brian with a smile and said, "Brian, Grandma wants you to come live with her. I'll buy you anything you want, okay?" In that moment, I felt overwhelmed and on the verge of tears. I was torn between questioning why now and wondering if I should deny Brian the chance to have another grandmother. I was at a loss for words. Then Brian spoke up, "I'm not going." My mother-in-law let out a confused sound at Brian's words. "Brian, what are you saying? You can live with Grandma. There'll be lots of delicious food, and I'll buy you toys," she said, trying desperately to persuade him. "I don't want to. You were mean to Mama, right? My only grandma is Mommy's mom," Brian said, pulling away from her and sitting down beside me. My mother-in-law fell silent, her expression reflecting a sense of defeat. After staring at us for a moment, she abruptly stood up and left the house without another word. We haven't heard from her since that day, and she never visited us again. The child support money she left behind remains untouched, saved for Brian's future. When I consulted my parents about whether to return the money, they said, "You never received child support before, so it's fine to keep it." Taking their advice, I decided to keep it. I hadn't heard anything about my mother-in-law since then, but honestly, it no longer matters to me. I have Brian, who is so strong and steadfast by my side. Even at his young age, Brian protected me from his grandmother's advances and chose me over her tempting offers. I love him with all my heart and am committed to raising him responsibly. I want to ensure his happiness, even without a father, now and forever.